the wool and butcher the best animals, but you let your flocks starve. You have not taken care of the weak. You have not tended the sick or bound up the injured. You have not gone looking for those who have wandered away and are lost. Instead, you have ruled them with harshness and cruelty. So my sheep have been scattered without a shepherd, and they are easy prey for any animal. And the words that I highlight are significant because it shows that uh, there is one in charge, and it shows that there are vulnerabilities among the sheep, depending on how they're cared for. They have wandered through all the mountains and all the hills across the face of the earth, yet no one has gone to search for them. Therefore, you shepherds, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says. I now consider these shepherds my enemies, and I will hold them responsible for what has happened to my flock. I will take away their right to feed the flock, and I will stop them from feeding themselves. I will rescue my flock from their mouths. The sheep will no longer be their prey. You can note that passage. And I present to you the final passage. This one is from 1 Peter 5, 1 to 5, from the NLT translation. And now, a word to you who are elders in the churches. I, too, am an elder and a witness to the sufferings of Christ. And I, too, will share in his glory when he is revealed to the whole world. As a fellow elder, I appeal to you, care for the flock that God has been entrusted to you. Watch over it willingly, not grudgingly, not for what you will get out of it, but because you are eager to serve God. Don't lord it over the people assigned to your care, but lead them by your own good example. And when the great shepherd appears, you will receive a crown of never ending glory and honor. In the same way, you who are younger must accept the authority of the elders, and all of you dress yourselves in humility as you relate to one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Those are the two passages that I would like us to focus on this evening and keep in mind what the church is for. Now, I'm going to deal with the matter now, starting of spiritual abuse. I know that I'm switching around um, my pictures here to make sure that I can see what I'm reading, but something is being covered up. Okay, let me try that. So when we talk of spiritual abuse, and I have relied upon a foundation called the Black Current Wellness Foundation, which is centered in the US. But when we talk of spiritual abuse, we are talking about something that has been happening for eons, but it's more recently coming to the focus of many religious organizations. It is not yet a chargeable offense. I do not know if it will become one, but it can be a chargeable offense if there are other things, provable things involved with it, and we'll touch on that a little bit later. But spiritual abuse, or called SA, refers to the misuse of spiritual beliefs, practices, or teachings to manipulate or control individuals, often in deeply personal or interpersonal contexts. It typically occurs in small group settings, pastoral relationships, or within intimate spiritual communities. Unlike broader forms of institutional abuse, like physical abuse, sexual abuse, financial abuse, and so on, spiritual abuse is psychologically invasive, often targeting the very core of an individual's identity and relationship with the divine. So, a person who is going through spiritual abuse will begin to lose their sense of self. Their belief system will be threatened. They will be wondering about a lot of things that they held as firm um, tenets of truth. They will be questioning their relationship with God. But this is the intent of it. And according to Oakley, in 2024, define spiritual abuse as sexual abuse, spiritual abuse as a process through which spiritual principles are twisted to enforce compliance, instill fear, or manipulate behavior. And this could involve spiritual gaslighting, making victims question their spiritual worth or divine standing. So the victim here, the perpetrator of spiritual abuse, is trying to demonstrate to the victim that they're messed up in the head. What they believe is not right. I have the truth. The abuser has the truth, and you need to agree with what I'm saying because you are only coming to this organization to learn. So you're at a disadvantage. So they weaken the person. They're coercive. So coercive obedience framed as submission to God. So twisting passages, changing phraseology would cause the person to begin to second guess themselves, to doubt their belief system. Then there is conditional acceptance within religious groups based on strict adherence to spiritual truths. So this is powerful because when you're in a group situation where everybody believes the wrong to be right, the person who does not believe that and cannot be persuaded by what the group believes is going to find themselves in isolation. And most times people don't want to be isolated. So they are being pressured to join the philosophy of the group because sometimes spiritual abuse is not just by one individual. Depending on the institution, it may be done through a group. And usually the group will consist of leaders of that organization. So victims are often told that questioning leadership or doctrine is a sign of spiritual failure, leaving them in a state of confusion, fear, and existential crisis. The damage is profound. What happens is they develop anxiety, depression, loss of spiritual identity, and even estrangement from one's community or faith tradition, according to Perry in 2024. Now, this is very prevalent in our religious organizations today. And let me say, it has touched the Adventist community. So no community is really immune from this. Now, when it comes to anxiety and depression, when a person has panic attacks in going to church or feeling depressed about going to church, a major part of their belief system and their their mental state in terms of how they deal with fear and anxiety is ruined. When you begin to feel anxious about going to church because of certain individuals or an individual, when you become depressed, when you begin to lose things that you were once interested in, you're in serious trouble. Now, when we look at religious abuse, there's a little bit of a difference here. And by contrast, religious abuse encompasses the systematic use of institutional religious authority to perpetrate harm. So the religion itself, that community itself, is at the core devious. And so if you're not falling in line with the membership, with how the leaders think, then you're going to find yourself in difficulty. It operates more broadly than spiritual abuse, often through formal structures such as churches, mosque, or other religious organization. So religious abuse involves doctrinal enforcement used to justify discrimination. So whatever the behaviors are that they exhibit, there is a doctrinal there's a doctrinal component. People believe in doctrine, people accept doctrine. So there's a doctrinal component that they use to manipulate the person. So if you don't believe in that doctrine, you begin to feel like you don't belong, or you begin to feel disrupted in your own belief system. Exclusionary practices such as excommunication or shunning. Now, look at how subtle this is, because people don't go, people don't want to be excommunicated from their church. They don't want to be shut out. They don't want people to shun them. So if the leaders and the officers are doing this, then they're going to feel very hurt, pretty angry. They're going to question, why am I in this situation? They're questioning their own confidence, and their own identity is going to be disrupted for sure. And then there's a hierarchical power structure that limit accountability and foster authoritarianism. So if you really want to be a part of this organization, this is what you're going to have to do. You can't believe this. The Bible doesn't teach this. If you want to draw close to God, you're going to have to do something wrong in order for you to prove your spiritual worth. So when we're talking about religious abuse, the way it differs a bit from spiritual abuse is, with spiritual abuse, there is verbal engagement with the intention of eroding your confidence, creating psychological and emotional distress. With religious abuse, however, it's wider. It happens in a context where you can also be physically abused. Along with the spiritual abuse, there can be physical abuse. But when you think about both, the abuse is geared to ruining, making you vulnerable. And the intent of getting you to believe something that is not true, that's not the end of that is not the end of the abuser's goal. The abuser wants to go further. This is only the first part of messing up your mind, so that everything you do after that will be under the control of that person. Sorry, I just flipped back. So religious abuse can be overt, such as endorsing corporal punishment, or demonizing marginalized groups, or covert, such as the use of religious law to control social or familial roles, according to Perry. Stop there. So now I have a chart here that will help you to look at spiritual abuse and religious abuse side by side. So the scope is individual or small group will be exposed to spiritual abuse, but institutional and systemic um, situations are attributed to religious abuse. So the system is geared to undermining the person, to making the person vulnerable. Spiritual abuse can happen on a one-to-one basis between a husband and wife, between a parent and a child, and so on. It can transfer itself into a church. However, in the religious institution, the system in it that operates it is definitely corrupt, and will do it. The heads of department will do it, or there are several individuals. There's a group dynamic there. Then the mechanism, misuse of spiritual teachings on the spiritual abuse, religious abuse, enforcement of doctrine and hierarchy. So you have to listen to the pastor. He's right. The pastor is God's servant. If you don't listen to him, what he says, you're going to be disobeying God. Context, personal relationships, pastor to member, religious abuse, organizational structure, like the church and the denomination. So in giving you a bit of a understanding of how these two can work at the same time, just a snippet of an experience. I was asked to investigate someone by a church member. And in telling me this story, I realized that the pastor was in deep trouble. The pastor would preach the sermon with the member in the congregation, and no one would know that something untoward was happening between the pastor and that member. But that member found out that the pastor was also doing the same thing with other members. So the member got upset, very upset, and reported this to a lawyer. And so my notes were required, and the interview with me was required. So now, when I didn't go to court, but my notes went to court, when the organization was questioned on this matter, it was frightening how the organization dealt with this situation, because it's as if the pastor was exonerated and the member was shunned. Because in giving me feedback, when the organization gave me feedback about the situation, it was as if it was okay because their behavior, which was of a sexual nature, was between two consenting adults. You understand what I'm saying here? So the organization itself fed into this organizational structural way of putting this person down, not supporting its member, uh, not paying attention to what Ezekiel was talking about, that you have a right to look after the sheep. it was a very pathetic situation, but it went before the courts, and the pastor had to be dismissed eventually because they didn't want this to go to the congregation. But I'm telling you this so that you can understand and know that these things do happen, and they're not far from us at all. Then you have typical impact, emotional manipulation, existential guilt, like people are under guilt all the time, the abuser. And then when the institution does it, discrimination, coercive control, physical, emotional harm is done. The person has little recourse because people don't bring a whole church. They don't blame a whole church for a problem because of they're weak, they're demoralized, they're abused. They don't trust their own selves. So it's very difficult to deal with. God told me you must obey me. Those are examples. Under religious abuse, our doctrine does not allow you to lead because of gender. So these are some frightening things, and I didn't make these up myself. These are what the researchers found that has happened, and certainly I have proven these things to have happened. So when we look at spiritual versus religious abuse, I want to bring something to your attention here. So spiritual abuse and religious abuse are often used interchangeably, but uh, are they the same? Despite differences, there are interesting elements, and I pointed out some to you just now that spiritual abuse can happen on any level, individual to individual. Religious abuse tend to happen in a larger context. How dimensional is spiritual abuse and religious abuse? There's gender, there's gender impact. Now, in terms of the dimension, um, when you're talking about spiritual abuse, the actions that are levied at the abuser are more narrow. It's more on the emotional level and the psychological level. When you're talking about religious abuse, it resembles general abuse. Like it can involve physical abuse, psychological abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, just a scope of things that can happen within that institution. It impacts both male and female, but it impacts women more. There are more cases of females being abused, being subject to both spiritual abuse and religious abuse than men. Most times, the men are guilty of perpetrating this type of abuse. So, likely locations of occurrence. Well, as I said before, sexual abuse can happen. Sexual abuse, spiritual abuse will happen in anywhere. It can happen in the house. It can happen in the church. It can happen just about anywhere two people are. But religious abuse tends to happen in religious institutions. Those are the likely locations. And spiritual abuse is psycho-emotional. Religious abuse may as well include physical harm. Um, is spiritual abuse and religious abuse a chargeable offense? Yes and no, and mainly no. When religious abuse involves physical abuse, like sexual abuse or outright physical harm or abuse or financial abuse, then it's chargeable. Those are criminal offense elements. But it's hard to prove emotional and spiritual abuse, emotional and psychological abuse, because there's room for excuse there, and you have to be observing the person over a lengthy period of time. Now, the legacy of abuse is significant because while the individual may not be severely traumatized by it, it leads to trauma. So if a person who has been abused does not get help, it just doesn't stay in and go away over time. It's not, that's not how it works. It only gets worse because there are elements in your living environment where you go, who you talk to, what people say that can trigger you. So let me just give you a simple example of this. And I'm taking it outside the context of both religious abuse and spiritual abuse to explain it. So there was a person who had an accident about a year ago. And in working with that person, um, it it appeared that she was doing quite well. Now, she ventured to go to church one weekend, and they were having something at the church, I think a birthday celebration. So in the church were, they did a bit of a decoration and there were balloons in the church. Now, this lady is a Seventh Day Adventist, and many of you might have heard about this accident um, in which a dear friend of hers died when she was going to church on Sabbath. Um, so when she went to church that Sabbath, one of the balloons um, broke, and there was a noise in the congregation, a noise in the church. And this lady who was sitting in the church went into a panic attack because the airbag in the car went off with the accident. And her behavior mimicked that experience as if she was going through that accident again. It's only because now, it's only because somebody came over to her in the church and who had been involved in an accident to quiet her. That person knew how to talk to her and engage her and brought her out of that panic attack situation. So I am pointing this out to say that things can happen and it seems that after a few weeks it's going away. But if you face the same situation or similar situation again, that you will find out whether or not um, you have overcome that experience because it's just waiting for a trigger to pull it. So we have to be able to take the person beyond the point of trigger when in trying to get them to get back to their to themselves, to find themselves, and to operate normally. I don't know how much time I have left, Sister Trudy, but I'm going on. So there's a recent statistical report on abuse in Canada, which I would like to share with you. This is on the broader context of abuse, family violence, um, intimate partner violence, children and youth being involved, mental health impact. So I don't want to spend much time here because it's not the main focus, but I just want to let you know that in family violence, which is abuse, intimate partner violence, which is abuse, children and youth ages 17 years and younger reported as victims of family violence, mental health impact. A significant number of victims experience mental health issues, uh, with 12% of young women age 15 to 24 reporting symptoms consistent with PTSD. Now, PTSD is post-traumatic stress disorder. I'm bringing this up because one can one get post-traumatic stress disorder from spiritual abuse, from religious abuse? Certainly. Um, Sometimes we think that you have to go through like a severe accident to experience a post-traumatic stress. But no, you can experience post-traumatic stress um, by going through anything that threatens your existence or your way of operation in life. What is abuse? It kind of seems um, futile that I'm raising this now. But abuse refers to intentional behaviors that cause harm to another person, which is manifested in various forms, including verbal abuse. So sometimes when people address something in the church or talk of something in the church, and when they address the congregation, one has to be very, very careful how those words proceed out of their mouths, how they formulate their opinions, because sometimes we do not know where people are coming from. And we can use phrases, we can use, um, um, give messages in a way that is sometimes patronizing, and people can be offended by that. And we are insensitive to it. We think that because of the position that we hold sometimes, and we know we've been doing this for a long time, that it's the person's problem. Sometimes we don't even think about that. So abuse can happen on those levels. Emotional or psychological abuse, causing mental distress or emotional pain. When people experiences these, they really don't want, they're not interested, they lose interest, they don't want to come back, they're fearful, they're anxious, and sometimes they're not brave enough to say to the person, could you have said this in a different way? You know, people who are abused carry a sense of, um, I didn't want to say weak, emotional weakness or psychological vulnerability. Then we talk about the spiritual and religious abuse, but there's also physical abuse, inflicting bodily harm or injury. Now, let me pause here a little bit because when we talk about physical abuse, a lot of times we get it into our head that it's somebody who is spanking a child or inflicting real physical pain. But just a touch in the wrong way can constitute physical abuse, especially if a person is intentionally trying to groom someone. So we have to be very careful about in our interactions with people. It's best to be in front of the person, talking to them, engaging them, so that they can feel comfortable seeing you, rather than to be just touching a person, and that might be a problem for them. You don't know what their experiences have been in the past. Sexual abuse, non-consensual sexual acts or exploitation. I'm just running through these because the focus is spiritual abuse, but in religious abuse, all of this can happen. Abuse can occur in many contexts, such as within families, relationships, or in institutions, and it often involves manipulation or control. This is key. This is why we need to listen. This is why we need to know the word. This is why we need to have confidence in God, in what he says, especially when we focus on the passages that I read to you before. You need to be, the Bible uses the word grounded. We need to be grounded. It is important to recognize that anyone can be a victim of abuse, regardless of age, gender, or background. And we look at a child witnessing abuse. I'm not going to spend much time here, but children are usually very sensitive to their parents and to what happens around them. If they're trained right, they can tell you things, and if you're not listening carefully to what they're saying, you realize later on that the child is being groomed in some way. As I said, I won't spend any more time on that. What causes abusive behaviors? So behind every cruel word, every raised fist, and every controlling threat lies a tangled web of pain, trauma, and dysfunction that transform ordinary people into those who harm the ones they claim to love. So abuse breeds abuse. Um, a child that is abused will first begin to abuse themselves if they don't experience love. If there is poor attachment, we grew up with poor attachment, and attachment is a subject in itself that is necessary. But if a child has no real connection or bonding with their parents, they're more vulnerable to abuse. If that child grows up in that atmosphere, they will likely become abuse themselves because attachment tells the person that I'm loved, I'm cared for, I'm special, um, I have a I prize myself. Uh, I have a connection with God. All of those things are foundational personality character things that helps a person to survive the things in life that occurs to them. So this sobering reality forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that abusive behavior is not born in a vacuum. It, it comes from somewhere. We may have abusers in forms of children growing up in our families, and we need to understand, look at that carefully and do something about it. It's a complex interplay of psychological, environmental, and biological factors that can turn even the most seemingly normal individual into someone capable of inflicting harm on their loved ones. I continue. Absorption of negative childhood experiences of pain, trauma, and dysfunction, attachment disorder. We talked about neglect and abandonment, narcissistic traits. Wow. I in saying something about narcissistic traits, the individuals who are narcissistic are one of the most difficult set of individuals to deal with. They are not sensitive to your feelings. They will plan hurt. They will play innocent as if they have not done anything. They don't do anything wrong. Narcissists don't do anything wrong. They only blame you for doing things wrong. And they do things that they appear innocent about. And I would encourage you to look up, just Google a narcissistic personality, and it will shock you to know that maybe even in our own experiences, there are people who are narcissists, very difficult to live with. You have borderline personality disorder, people whose mental stability is on the line. There is no specific way that they order their lives. They're always uh, on on the fence, and 1 minute they change to something else, and you can't believe it's the same person. Substance abuse, environmental issues, and socioeconomic stressors, and shaping of the mind by media influence. Now, this is really, really critical because our children are watching a lot of abusive things and they're hearing a lot of phrases and their communication, they're losing proper communication. All of these things can lead to the behaving in ways that will affect people uh, religiously, in religious abuse or spiritual abuse. So my list kind of goes on with that. There are people who have neurological and genetic factors that can cause abuse. And these are more concrete things that when they are recognized, you can get treatment for them. Um, this also has to do with their brain chemistry, genetic factors, um, and head injury, which is also a critical piece of how people can change. And when people are under stress, they tend to behave quite differently, and some are more intrusive in their behaviors than others. Relationship dynamics and isolation. Now, isolation in and of itself um, is not a bad thing, but when it results from abuse, when a person can't socialize, when they can't mix with other people, this is very, very hard, difficult, and challenging for them. So the impact of on the victim, the family, and the community. The impact of spiritual abuse can be profound, leading to emotional distress. Number one, victims may experience anxiety, depression, and low self esteem. Loss of faith. Spiritual abuse can cause individuals to disconnect from their faith or feel guilty about their beliefs. And as I said, isolation is critical. When they're isolated, they become very, very vulnerable. And it's easy to prolong the abuse, not only in a spiritual or religious sense, but in addition, they can be physically abused, more sexually abused, and financially abused. Identity crisis. This is serious because lack of confidence in self and having a sense of lostness. This is like personality change, deep sense of disconnection from the spirituality. Now, I'm looking at religious with spiritual abuse and trauma. I glossed over this initially, but when spiritual abuse carries the same intent of power, control, and manipulation. If you forget anything, remember these. The intent of the abuser is to exercise power over the victim, control the victim, manipulate the victim. Once those are done, the devil works the same way. Once those are done, the person is pretty much under the control of the abuser. The physical, emotional, or psychological response to religious beliefs, practices, or structures that is experienced by an individual as overwhelming or disruptive and has lasting adverse effects on a person's physical, mental, social, emotional, or spiritual well-being. Highly damaging. But you notice that all of this here, spiritual abuse, has to do with the mind and the emotions. So the the psychological aspect is the input aspect, and the emotional aspect is the resulting aspect. It expresses what is your emotion expressing? Is it expressing fear, anxiety? Are you having panic attack? The emotion, are you crying? Are you depressed? All of that. But all of this comes because the psychic is damaged. The belief system is changed. And so it triggers a response. It's a type of a psychological abuse that happens in religious settings. It often includes using power, sometimes in the name of God or religion, to control, confuse, or pressure someone. This can involve making a person think, say, or do things without letting them exercise their own choices. So you become a literal slave. I'm coming down to the end now. I think I have just one more slide. So, in abuse, interactions in which one person behaves in a cruel, violent, demeaning, or invasive manner toward another person or an animal. That is the definition of abuse. The term most commonly implies physical mistreatment, but also encompasses sexual and psychological, emotional, and mistreatment, according to the APA, American Psychological Association. When you when we're looking at the result of abuse, which goes over to the trauma side or the post-traumatic side, any disturbing experience that results in significant fear, helplessness, disassociation, confusion, or other disruptive feelings intense enough to have a long-lasting negative impact on a person's attitudes, behavior, and other aspects of functioning. This is the description of trauma or post-traumatic stress disorder. So, what to do after experiencing sexual, I keep saying sexual abuse because I deal with so many sexual abuse victims, spiritual abuse, and religious abuse. So healing from sexual abuse, spiritual abuse, and religious abuse is a complex process that requires time, support, and commitment for self-care. Some suggestions are as remove yourself from the abusive environment, whether it be religious or spiritual or any other form of abuse. Remove yourself. Take a break from religious activities. Now, it would seem that this is bad advice, but it's very hard for a person to really feel and find themselves by going back to the place of the abuse. So you don't just absent yourself and do nothing. Seek counseling and support. Develop a healthy spiritual practice like praying, reading, and if you have uh, a friend that you really trust, engage that person to pray with you and to study with you. Establish and maintain boundaries. Now, sometimes this is difficult when you've been abused to maintain those boundaries, but you have little or no other choice in the matter if you want to resolve the situation. Focus on recovery. And Psalms 55:22 says, cast your cares on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never let the righteous be forsaken. Isaiah 41:10. So do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. And lastly, he heals the brokenhearted and binds up their wounds. Psalms 147:3. After working for several years with people who have been abused in every which way, I can tell you with certainty that they experience healing. But not because you go to counseling, but because of what you are able to do with the counseling. This is where I leave it this evening. May God bless you.